Hi everyone, it's Sonia here. In my last video, I told you I was going to tell you about Peter Daszak and his various programs, so that's what I'm here to do today. Also, we're going to talk about why the Senate recently passed a bill to declassify all intelligence information on the Wuhan Institute of Virology and the origins of COVID-19. If you like the video, thanks for leaving me a like and a comment. Don't forget to subscribe. Thank you for your support on Patreon. That helps keep my channel going. Also, you have seen firsthand how lockdowns, quarantines, and shortages can happen. If you don't want to get caught unprepared for the next round, here's what I would recommend. My Patriot Supply are the go-to experts in emergency preparedness. Right now, you can save up to $70 off a 4-week supply of their delicious and nutritious food that lasts up to 25 years. Don't get caught unprepared. Not when you can have a 4-week emergency supply of food shipped right to your doorstep. Go to preparewithtruthorgirls.com right now. That's preparewithtruthorgirls.com for more info and a discount. It looks like Fauci and his associates like Peter Daszak knew full well that the virus could very well have originated from a lab, but they did what they could to stop this from becoming public knowledge. They used their influence to suppress this information. Why would they do this? Did they have something to gain? Were they trying to protect themselves, hoping that the truth wouldn't come out? The truth being that not only did they know it could have come from a lab, but if it did, they were likely involved in the process. As you will see, the trail of funding leads straight from US government agencies to Peter Daszak's NGO to the Wuhan Institute of Virology. So, who is Peter Daszak? Peter Daszak is the president of EcoHealth Alliance, a nonprofit that claims to focus on pandemic prevention. But it turns out that in many ways, EcoHealth Alliance is at the center of the COVID-19 pandemic. EcoHealth Alliance funded bat coronavirus research, including virus collection at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Yes, the same lab that COVID might have originated from. Daszak is also on the WHO's committee to investigate the pandemic's origins. Yes, you have a person on the WHO committee who is possibly implicated in the origin of the pandemic, and he gets to decide what we should and shouldn't believe about where the virus came from. Not surprisingly, he vigorously denied that the virus could have come from a lab. In fact, a FOIA request by the US group Right to Know revealed that it was Peter Daszak who drafted this letter, published in The Lancet on February 18th and signed by multiple authors. Daszak wrote this letter and then made it look like it had been written by a whole group of doctors, thereby avoiding the appearance of a political statement. The CDC received this letter and just nodded their heads. From that moment on, any talk of lab origins was labeled a conspiracy theory, even though the matter had never really been properly investigated. We were just to accept the CCP's explanation that the virus just popped up naturally. And Dr. Fauci even collaborated with Facebook to censor any content that went against this approved narrative. Other platforms like Twitter and YouTube made it their policy to remove content and users that challenged the official story, even if they were scientists and even if they were from China and even if they had inside information. The discussion was closed. In a statement published in the New York Times, Peter Daszak had said, "Pandemics are like terrorist attacks. We know roughly where they originate and what's responsible for them, but we don't know exactly when the next one will happen. They need to be handled the same way, by dismantling all possible sources and dismantling those before the next pandemic strikes." Does this mean he's recommending that research at the WIV be shut down? Not a bad idea, actually, don't you think? But of course, Daszak was playing innocent. Where did this come from? Not a lab. Certainly not the lab that I've been funding. Let's keep looking someplace else, where you're never going to find it. In an online talk organized by Columbia University's School of International and Public Affairs last October, he presented a slide entitled Donald Rumsfeld's Prescient Speech, which contained this quote: "There are known knowns, there are things that we know we know. There are also unknowns, that is to say, things that we know we don't know. But there are also unknown unknowns. So there are things we don't know. According to Daszak's comments in the online discussion, the potential for an unknown attack is the same for viruses. Turns out Peter Daszak knew a whole lot more than he was letting on, and what he knew best was, number one, where the virus probably came from, and number two, how to cover his ass with master level BS. So Where did EcoHealth Alliance get the funding to do the research on bat coronaviruses at the WIV? Well, if you dig into their website, you'll find that the answer is buried deep inside the privacy policy section, or at least it was, where they had stated that they had received funds from the NIH, the National Science Foundation, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, U.S. Agency for International Development, and the Department of Defense. I can't show you this part or any other part of their website because they claim it's protected under copyright. That would prevent me from showing any of it in a video, but I'll give you some links. They have now also removed any disclosing information about their funding and added that anything you hear about their funding from other websites has nothing to do with them. The notice is actually quite scary. It sort of reads as, "Don't you dare talk about us and our funding." All of the funding, though, is available on Google Doc, and there are more details also available on independentsciencenews.org. I'll leave you the links below, but as the EcoHealth Alliance said, this is unverified information. As far as I know, the NIH funding was very openly, publicly disclosed and discussed. Actually, it had been reported that they had received a $3.7 million 5-year grant from the NIH, which was at the time under the control of Dr. Anthony Fauci, the same person who obviously steered the government and media response to the pandemic, and the same person who Peter Daszak also emailed thanking him for keeping his mouth shut about lab origins. This grant had been cut by the Trump administration when they learned EcoHealth Alliance had been funding research on bat coronaviruses at the WIV. And the media portrayed EcoHealth at the time as a kind of victim of Trump's efforts to undermine their valiant battle against pandemics. And the funding was restored in late August 2020 and even topped up with an extra $7.5 million grant. But the largest grants to EcoHealth Alliance came from the Pentagon, which had given them just under $39 million from 2013 to 2020, mostly from the Defense Threat Reduction Agency. The State Department also gave them an additional nearly $65 million. So between the Pentagon and USAID, EcoHealth received over $103 million. Other funding came from the National Science Foundation, the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Commerce, the Department of Agriculture, and the Department of the Interior. So, I mean, in other words, EcoHealth was mostly funded by U.S. government agencies. Wouldn't it be awful if it turned out the U.S. government had inadvertently been funding the creation of a Frankenvirus or even a natural virus that then leaked out and killed hundreds of thousands of Americans? Don't you think there should be a thorough investigation that people have the right to know? Well, Peter Daszak's perhaps cover-up seems to be becoming unraveled. A newly unearthed video proves that there were live bats kept at the Wuhan lab. The footage was from an official Chinese Academy of Sciences video that was made in 2017 to launch the new BSL-4 lab. Since the video has emerged, the US government has ordered the intelligence agencies to redouble their efforts to probe the lab leak theory. And the WHO has given its support to a second phase investigation. Meanwhile, China calls this a smear campaign and blame shifting. Daszak had previously denied this, saying they had only brought virus specimens to the lab, not bats. He said there was no evidence of this anywhere and even called it a conspiracy theory. But after the evidence surfaced that there actually were bats at the lab, he changed his tune and tweeted that he was not surprised there were bats after all. Yeah, of course he wasn't surprised. He had to have known all along. See, it was Daszak himself who had stated that there was gain-of-function research being done and it was being performed on bat coronaviruses and for the purpose of making vaccines. He's the one who said that. He said it was because it was impossible to make a vaccine from an animal coronavirus and there would be no treatment. So in case it jumped, I guess it's better to have some lab-made virus and vaccine so that you can then use it. I mean, I don't really understand all that. I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. But I mean, here's the text. Here's what he said. You tell me what you think. Well, when the virus outbreak started, the WHO sent a team of experts to investigate it. China refused most of the candidates, but they approved Peter Daszak. So he went to the lab and returned to say there was no evidence of a lab leak. Oddly, while he was there, he didn't request to see the database. He said they all already knew what was in it anyway. No need to see the data. And besides, the Wuhan team told them the data was no longer available because it had been hacked. Convenient time for hacking if you're trying to avoid having your database scrutinized, but that was just a coincidence. And there was no further investigation for the next year, giving the Chinese ample time to cover up, if there was anything to cover up. So you have the Frankenvirus hypothesis, but there's an alternate hypothesis that also involves the lab, which is that in 2012, there had been an outbreak of an illness in miners in China who had come in contact with bats. And this has been hypothesized to possibly be the source of the pandemic. The Wuhan lab people admit to having gone there and investigated and taken samples, but that's it. They don't admit that that had anything to do with COVID-19. It's just something that's kind of getting floated around, which I guess might be better than if it was a Frankenvirus, but not that much better. However, there was no trail that led back from that outbreak in 2012 to the current COVID-19 pandemic. The trail only led back to several workers at the Wuhan lab being the first people in the world to get sick with COVID-19-like symptoms. So you have the theory that it's a Frankenvirus, and then you have also the theory that maybe it wasn't a Frankenvirus, but it had something to do with samples that the WIV collected in 2012 and brought back to the lab. But again, there's no solid evidence, just a lot of circumstantial evidence. But the matter is not settled, and even the WHO said they were not satisfied with the investigation and said the lab leak hypothesis needs to be studied more. Finally, I have some wonderful news. Several senators have come out and called out Fauci and big tech for withholding the truth about COVID-19 and for conspiring with big tech to censor anyone who speaks against the official narrative that was decided by Fauci, who we know has some dubious associations. They're calling for both Fauci and big tech to be held responsible for making the pandemic worse by preventing the free exchange of information concerning both lab origins and treatments. They even specifically mentioned that some countries have been having great success with a drug that Google has made a taboo topic and has even removed videos and channels of people who spoke about it, even if they were doctors. Does Google really want to censor me for saying this is what the senator said? Well, that's exactly what the senators have a problem with. And the last time I checked, they were the government, not you, Google. Here are a few of the things that they said. Marsha Blackburn, senior Republican U.S. state senator for Tennessee, said big tech took down any info that contradicted the Beijing-run China-funded WHO. Mike Braun, junior Republican United States senator from Indiana, he's the one who said that they got a unanimous vote through Senate to ask intelligence agencies to declassify the information they have on the Wuhan lab. Republican Senator George Marshall from Kansas, who's also a physician, he said in January 2020, the Chinese were saying there was no person-to-person transmission, and the WHO and CDC accepted it. Scientists signed a letter dismissing lab origins, and they were funded by the NIH, and the CDC just agreed with them. There's no scientific method. Collusion of big tech working with Fauci to suppress this story. Did the U.S. fund labs that led to the development of this virus? This is all senators bringing this up, not people in the basement with a tinfoil hat on their head. And Republican Senator Ron Johnson from Wisconsin said federal agencies under the direction of Fauci funded this research for years. In the last 18 months, China has had plenty of time to destroy the evidence that came from this lab, like I told you. They didn't let flights out of Wuhan to the rest of China, but they let people fly out of China to the rest of the world. And he said the NIH guidelines are to do nothing for sick people, only to treat them when they're very sick. There's no early detection or treatment. And he asked, why did Fauci, the health agencies, and the media suppress doctors who had success treating patients with repurposed drugs? Hundreds of thousands of lives could have been saved. Anyhow, this is the best news I've had in a long time. And I hope it'll mark a turning point for America for free discussion and for the course of the pandemic. By the way, Facebook has already unfortunately flagged the senator's video as missing context, saying that it could potentially lead to people being misinformed about the pandemic. Once again, Facebook, who has teamed up with Fauci, is deciding what people are allowed to hear or not. So that said, I hope this information was interesting and useful to you. Thanks again for hitting like. Thank you for your support, and thank you for checking out the link. And thanks for listening to me, and I'll see you next time.